When I was a Christian, I was absolutely passionate about missions, especially short-term missions. As a teenager, I went on a ton of short-term missions, usually 1 or 2 a year, and also did a lot of long-term type missions work as well. But in this video, I really want to focus in on short-term missions, their effect on me, what I think of them now, how they shaped my life, do I regret that I went on them, all that kind of stuff. So let's just dive right in. So on short-term missions, I've been everywhere from even just an hour away to migrant camps in Skagit County, Washington, when I lived in Washington State, all the way to places as far away as the Philippines, Nicaragua, Mexico. And I was even on the verge of pursuing a full-time career in missions because of my experiences on these mission trips. Honestly, when I look back at my Christian life, I feel the most complicated about missions. What do I mean by that? I mean, most of my Christian life, I don't miss. It was largely in many ways a waste of time. It was anywhere from silly to traumatic. But missions, there's a lot that I actually really liked about missions, and I sometimes miss about missions. So let's go ahead and get into all that detail. A lot of the good that came from missions for me is what it did in terms of shaping my larger worldview. At the time, I thought it was my Christian worldview, but now that I've left the church, I've realized it's just my larger worldview. It let me get to see other cultures. It let me get to understand people who have a very different life experience than me. Going to the Philippines, I got to see a whole other side of the world. I got to see other cultures. I got to talk to people who, were just so different and yet so similar. And it just kind of opened my eyes to how different but similar the world is. Experiencing, different Hispanic cultures, Nicaragua, Mexico, the folks from Oaxaca, Mexico that came up to the migrant camps, and just getting to know these people and minister to them, as I would have said back then. That's such a churchy thing to say, is minister to them, but that's what I thought was hugely impactful, and I honestly think to this day helped shape my desire to help people. I don't know if I would have been as passionate about supporting Ukraine as I am if I had not had these formative missions experiences. Maybe I would have, but I'm not sure if I actually would have or not. So that's definitely something that was a huge benefit of these mission trips, was just how it shaped me, my desire to help people, my desire to do good in the world. So that being said, I don't necessarily feel like we did a lot of good. And that's really the negative of it is, most mission trips, especially like high school mission trips and middle school mission trips, you're taking a bunch of kids, a bunch of teenagers to somewhere, rather it's, an hour away, rather it's, a 18-hour plane ride away. And basically, like, we're not trained construction people. We're not really trained in any of this, the basic, like, gospel message theology kind of stuff. Yeah, we maybe can do half decently, but we really aren't experts. We're not, we have no training in, we're not trained social workers. We're not trained to know how to deal with certain situations and really be most effective at combating, rather it's poverty or social injustice or all these different things. We're a bunch of kids on a wide-eyed adventure, and so the actual good and impact that we have the ability to make was pretty small. And like, especially the way a lot of mission trips are structured, like the mission trip to Mexico, we didn't even really stay in the same place very much. It was like we'd go to one part of Reynosa and do some dramas, those street dramas where they've got the impactful, powerful music and you're acting stuff out. And then maybe they'll have, like a street preacher type person preach the gospel in Spanish, and then maybe play with the kids a little bit and, give them a little bit of food or something. And then it's like, maybe even that same day or the next day, you all hop back on your bus and you drive to another part of town with other people, and then it's just like you do this day after day after day. And so you're not even building relationships with anybody. And it basically is kind of like a summer camp for Christians. And it was kind of a similar situation in the Philippines, where like the first half of the trip we were at a school for deaf kids. We did build a little bit of relationship with them. But then we went on these other trips where we basically would go to like an orphanage for a morning and do some dramas and play with the kids and then move on. Or we'd go into a town square and street preach and street evangelize, and then we'd leave. Or we'd go somewhere else and do the same thing. And it was just like not really any sense of actual impact. And so like the effectiveness of these trips is really, really called into question, especially for how expensive they are. I mean, everybody who's ever been in the church has probably gotten a please sponsor me letter from youth trying to raise money for missions. And like a lot of these trips, like, I mean, I feel like the Philippines trip was $2 or $3 grand. And it's like, what impact did we actually have? If you think, okay, 20 people are going on this trip at $2 grand a pop, you're talking like $40,000 if you'd, maybe like hired some people in the Philippines to do the work and, just let them minister to their people, let them handle poverty, let them help build this school up, have them build relationships with these kids more than these random American teenagers. Think of how much more, how much further that money could have gone, especially in a place like the Philippines where like the dollar goes so much further. So, I think about that kind of thing, like in reflecting on these short-term missions. And I think even if I was a Christian, I would still have these sorts of questions and these sorts of thoughts about what is effective, because that's just kind of the kind of person that I am. And sending a bunch of teens across the world is not a very effective way to get anything done. Oftentimes, rather it's be short-term or long-term missionaries can be very culturally insensitive or just not know. Or, there's language barriers, things like that that make effectiveness much less. I personally didn't experience too much of what I would consider being culturally insensitive, although maybe I totally was and was completely oblivious. But you certainly hear stories, especially in more remote areas where Christians are just really rude and kind of like try and change the way that people exist. They try and change people from how they like to dress, from traditions they have, from things that are meaningful to them. They might even introduce diseases that kill a lot of people. That's a problem with, remote tribes in South America or Papua New Guinea or things like that, where these missionaries want to go in and preach the gospel. And I mean, they're just as likely to get themselves killed, just like Jim Elliot and Nate Saint and all those guys in Ecuador back in the 50s, 60s. I can't remember exactly, but End of the Spear. But you can see that in like the movie End of the Spear, which is really the only Christian movie that I actually ever really enjoyed. That's a whole nother topic. But yeah, just the level of cultural insensitivity, trying to westernize different people groups, things like that, is a huge problem of both short and long-term missions. But definitely, especially if you have like groups of people traveling across the world for 1 or 2 weeks, that problem is just going to exacerbate itself. Like, let's just be honest, that's not setting anybody up for success. I actually even think about this kind of thing in regards to Ukraine. If you follow the channel at all, I am passionate about what's going on in Ukraine. I have friends in Ukraine. I'm very concerned for Ukraine. I want this war to end in Ukrainian victory, but I often think about, should I go over there? Is there something that I'd be more effective doing over there than here? Sometimes I get comments on videos that's like, well, if you care so much about Ukraine, why don't you go over there? And it's something that I've thought about, or particularly from this short-term missions kind of perspective. It's like, okay, yeah, I could pay $2,000 to $5,000 to stay there, like to fly over there, stay there for a couple weeks, several months, and maybe do something. But would that be the most effective use of my money, or are there people who already know Ukrainian who would be better equipped and I could support them, support their organizations to help in humanitarian ways, help in military ways, or support the people that I know there and help them? So it's all these sorts of questions that, having been a part of short-term missions, I can ask more effectively. So in that sense, I'm really, really grateful that I went on these trips. I'm grateful for how it shaped my life. But do I think that short-term missions are effective? I think if you've watched the video to this point, you know my answer. No, absolutely not. I don't regret my short-term missions experiences, but I do not think it is an effective way to create real, lasting change in the world in any kind of positive way. And so that's really my thoughts. Honestly, even if I still was a Christian, I think that my thoughts would be very, very similar. I feel like I could have made this video as a Christian and it would largely have been unchanged. I would have advocated for long-term missions, for looking at how we could plug in people in the cultural context that they're in to preach the gospel, versus having sort of like the white savior kind of complex of have people flying all over the world to do these short-term missions that maybe or maybe don't make any kind of impact long-term whatsoever.